So, hello and welcome to class 2 of Child Growth and Development Skills. This is the second half I promised you last week, or the beginning of this week when my original PowerPoint was deleted or lost. This won't be very long. Again, I'm trying to make these more digestible. So, my background is in teaching, which means I do have a good idea about best practices in teaching students of all ages. And what is true for students of all ages is that, and I know this is true for myself, we can really only sit and listen to lecture content for 15 to 20 minutes. Now, I do have a video to break that up, but I try not to exceed that time without including some sort of activity or something to break up the monotony or just the boredom that can be experienced with just a lecture. I know I get distracted after a while, and I'm not the only one. So this is part 2, and today we'll talk a little bit more about what is child development, which is obviously a central part of this course and very important. All right, let's go. So as always, our agenda for today, we're going to do a brief syllabus review. We didn't really do that the first time, one, because that was on my original PowerPoint, and I wanted you all to complete the scavenger hunt first, or at least have an opportunity to complete the scavenger hunt. So I'm going to review those answers, the ones that are available, as well as key points that I want you to know from the syllabus. Then we're going to watch a video. This is one of the ways I break things up. This is a kind of funny video, but it's also why I think understanding child development is so important, why I like teaching courses like these, because I am someone whose background is in early childhood. So I obviously must love children. But I also think it helps me to demonstrate the differences in abilities of children at different ages. Then we'll briefly review some of the historical views on children and development as it relates to this text being a multicultural text. And this is actually a text I'm using for 2 different courses, for this course and a multicultural or a diversity and cultural competence course. And it's kind of odd because the text is really focused on early child development, but it also takes a very deep look into the cultural impact, which if you know, for someone like me who's been working in this field, I have truly, from my own observations and experiences, and also what I've learned through research, that you cannot disentangle a person's culture from their development. They're actually, culture has such a strong influence on how a child is raised. Thus, their development, the development of a child growing up in one culture versus another can be very different. And also how those historical views were influenced by either cultural events, cultural phenomenons, or really historical events, but those historical events are affected cultures in different ways. And then we'll do a wrap up and preview to next week. I had considered starting on the trauma-informed perspective, but I actually think that's a very critical part of child development right now, and I want to have more time to focus on that, and I'd rather it not be kind of left to the end. All right, so let's move to the syllabus. So let's dive in. I love visuals. So what I wanted to review, again, I tend to do a little bit better. I've had to play a lot of catch up this week. I usually would have used some animations for my slides, but I'll try my best to make it easy to read. As you might have noticed, your highest point assignment or assessment method, depending, my syllabi are all a little bit different in how I've written them, but for the most part, there's one assignment or assessment method that's indicated as the highest point total. What I wanted to point out, so the answer is tests. The tests make up, I believe, 30% of your grade, which I will make sure right now because I have the syllabus. See, now we can all see. The tests make up, as you can see, 30% of your grade. We're going to go back to the syllabus too because I've already made some changes I'm going to upload today. But I wanted to point that out, as well as the fact that these are not going to be your typical tests. They will be take-home tests. So I will give you a week for the most part to complete each test, and they will be based on the chapter content, but more using application and open-ended questions to make sure you understand how you would apply this content, or how you would apply it to your experiences so far in early childhood development, or how you would apply it to your observations that you have to do for the course. Attendance and participation. So this is odd because we don't have synchronous classes. This is an online course, so I don't actually get to see you, but that doesn't mean that there aren't rules for, sorry, something was on me. It was just outside because, as you know, I have chickens and they were trying to escape their pen, and I might have some stuff on me, and hopefully that doesn't happen, but who knows. What I want to note for attendance and participation is, one, I made one change that I want you all to see, and it is this special circumstances section. I'm not going to read that to you, but it outlines if you are having a personal hardship that does not have documentation, you need to contact me immediately so we can discuss how you can still be successful in the class. I am someone who wants to make sure everyone can do well in the course. Now, I am going to be limited in how much I can do because I have a large course load. It's hard to manage that. This is my first semester, so I'm also figuring out the systems as I go. But I am willing to support students who need that additional support. It doesn't mean that you don't have to do the work, and it doesn't mean you necessarily don't have to do it on time, but it does mean I can be understanding and we can create a timeline appropriate for you if we decide, and that means I decide with you, that that is the best option. I might not think that's the best option. That's the thing. You have to meet with me if that's something that you want to discuss. So that is here now in the syllabus. At least it will be posted once, it should be posted before I post this recording, so never mind. But that's something I wanted to make note of. But also, in addition to that, we do have a rule in the Human Services Department, which is where this course comes from, and that is 3 missed postings. So every week there will be a discussion board posting. That's how we try to engage students. Sorry, that's a garbage truck. If you miss 3 consecutive postings and you have not contacted me or communicated with me why you've missed those postings, then I will be dropping you from the class and you'll need to re-enroll. And that is not me trying to be, I don't want to be difficult or inflexible. That is why I say contact me. But if you don't, that's the process I will follow, because that's departmental policy in human services. Something you should also know, this is an online course, but I am on campus 3 days a week. You can't tell, I am at home right now. I did say I'm at home. Thursdays and Fridays, I likely will typically be at home because my commute is long and working from home is okay. I've made my office hours to be Monday through Wednesday, and I am going to be physically in the office and have my Zoom room open, which, let me check something here because I also wanted to change course. Yeah. So we're going to change Blackboard Collaborate to my personal Zoom room. And then I am going to copy this invitation. Sorry. I just want to do this now before I forget and while I'm on here, but Blackboard Collaborate is not super easy for me to use. And it seems like just using my personal Zoom room will be much better. So let me add the link here. Insert link. All right. Is it there? Let's see. All right. I'm going to add, just in case that's not clear. To me, that's not clear. All right. So now you have the link. That's what we're going to do moving forward is my personal Zoom room because I'm Zoom is just much easier for me to understand. Also though, if Monday through Wednesday does not work for you in person so the other piece is I am on the Lincoln campus Monday through Wednesday, except for the afternoons of Tuesday because I have to teach a course in Warwick. But for the most part, I am on the Lincoln campus most of those days, and that's where you can find me. Otherwise, you can schedule a Zoom for Thursday and Friday, and I will happily meet with you. I don't have any appointments standing at this time. Textbook. There was a bit of I don't want to say miscommunication, but confusion because of what I left from the previous instructor. So the instructor who provided me her materials, when she taught this course before, the course was taught on a grant, which means the students received free tuition, free tuition and funding for purchases of books. So that course key was for those students to access the book for free. That is not the case for you, and I'm sorry. I was not here for when that happened. I don't have any other option than to offer the book this way to you. So you can, and I've added the links on the book information page in Blackboard. But if you're struggling, let me know. It unfortunately is available online for e-rental monthly or in print. Again, like I said, would probably recommend the rental. I like this textbook, but if you were going to buy a textbook on early childhood development, I would have some better suggestions that I would give to you if this is your field. So, as someone who's early childhood education and early childhood special education, I have to know all about early childhood development. So I do try to keep up-to-date textbooks and the best textbooks about child development. And there's one in particular I like. It's not used by our university, but if you're curious about it, let me know and I can tell you. And then lastly, I changed this on the syllabus as well. Let's pop that up. You might have noticed it here. Because although many of you have sent me emails and I've responded, I'm going to ask that you use Blackboard Message. This makes it easier for me to keep track of who's messaging me from which course. I have 2 in-person courses and 2 online courses. For me, it will be easiest if I can have some separation between those courses. So I'm going to reserve email for my in-person courses because those are students I see more frequently in person and can talk to anyway. If you have a question, please use Blackboard. That was not here. I just added it because I wanted to make sure everybody was aware at the same time. And because I realized I thought I'd added this to all my syllabi, I did not. I am scatterbrained. It's one of my, it's something I've been working on, and I try to find different ways to catch myself. Something I figured out and was recommended to me by former faculty that I loved is I'm going to track changes as I'm adjusting my syllabi so I can, I see what was there, what isn't there, and you can see what I have added every time. So I track the changes, upload the same tracked changes document to Blackboard, and then you see the changes I make. All right, that's all for the scavenger hunt. Let's go to the next slide. So key points. First, quizzes. I am really struggling with implementing quizzes because I've actually never taught a course where we used quizzes. But I've also never been in a position where I taught 4 courses at one time. I've always been an adjunct professor teaching 1 or 2 classes, or a teaching assistant or student teaching a course as the instructor, which means I'm only in one at a time. Now that I'm doing multiple, the grading is definitely going to be more difficult, and I know why quizzes are used because it's a little bit easier. I'm going to make an executive decision. You have no quiz or reflection or anything that you could do this week. I'm going to make the decision on Monday, and likely you will do quizzes. And if you don't like your quiz grade, you have the option for a reflection, and you just have to include the content that was covered on the quiz, if that makes sense. Because I create the quizzes and the reflections, I will write that out as well. But that is what I'm leaning toward, is the quizzes will still be a requirement, but they will not necessarily impact your grade the way you thought they might have, because you'll have the chance to make them up. And the reflections will just be like one page on, okay, what questions did you get wrong? Why do you think you got those questions wrong? That basically it. So you can try to make up whatever mistakes that could have been just based on your own anxiety or confusion, because I am someone who struggles with that as well. And then actually, I'll pull up the syllabus one more time, a few more times. Where is it? So here you'll see I highlighted this because I knew I wasn't sure. But I do want to make sure that we're all up to date on the reading. And in addition to that, I wanted to show you, if you hadn't noticed, I put a few different course schedules. So this is just the syllabus schedule. This is traditional, what you typically see when things are due within the week. But for me, it kind of helps to also know separate when are the due dates and deadlines. And then since this is an online course, what are you going to expect each week? So here's my plan. There will be typically assigned book chapters. Now here it's kind of separated, but there's more chapters than there were in previous iterations. What you'll also see that I think is very important. Oh, it's not on this, never mind. So in my other course, we're using the same text, but it's my culture course, so I have not had them read the same exact sections. But I want you to notice here, this is kind of a recommended structure. That's why I said what you should do. But as you can see, there's a single date for the test 1 and test 2. Ignore that. I'm thinking of my other course. This is for you to help. When do you submit the quiz? When do you submit those weekly materials? I will also provide that information for you in my weekly PowerPoints on Mondays, but just so you know what to expect. And then I'm going to have to add these to the presentation. Hold on. I'll fix that in a second. All right. So the other piece, live recording. I'm going to be recording live every Tuesday at 1:30, because you might not join, and that's okay, but I want everyone to have access to live questions in person, because sometimes it's just easier to do that, and sometimes it's easier for me to ask. So I just want to make sure everyone's aware that you have live recordings every week starting at 1:30. And then I just want to briefly look at the course objectives, because it's not something we did go through, but I think it's important to know what we want you to know and why. And mainly, these course outcomes come directly from NAEYC. NAEYC, N-A-E-Y-C, is the National Association for the Education of Young Children. You will hear me say that probably a lot, because that is like our large governing national organization that dictates standards and policy and practice, that really tells early childhood educators how they should be teaching in classrooms, just to put it bluntly. But I would like you all to know and review these. So basically, we want to understand, we want to understand development, different aspects of development, the ways that children develop, how this knowledge and how development works is not just linear. It has many dimensions, many pieces come into play and layers. There's a lot of assessments we use to determine where a child is in terms of their developmental age. We'll talk about at a different time the difference between chronological and developmental age. We'll talk about what's developmentally appropriate practice. We'll talk about kind of the importance of relationships with families and community settings, and the importance of advocacy for our children and families. When we talk about early childhood education, our program might be focused at CCRI. Our program at CCRI might be focused on early childhood education, not both early childhood ed and early childhood special education, but all early childhood education should be inclusive to the needs of all children and families, which means we try to we expect that the practices that early educators are using are inclusive practices, regardless of their background. That doesn't always happen, but it's still very important that we understand how even within typical development, there are ranges of differences. So we need to know how to work with those ranges of differences within typical development. All right. Let's go to the next page. So that's all I have for the syllabus. Feel free to contact me via Blackboard message with any questions. I'm going to move on to why am I here? Now I should say that's one of my stepkids. We were in Target and she wanted to be an item for sale. So what could I had to take a picture. Her sister did it too, but I couldn't get 2 pictures in here. But if you haven't figured it out, I kind of love kids. I think they're pretty amazing and like really funny. And because this course is about child growth and development, I want to convince you how they're amazing and great and why you should know all about child development and support children's development in a healthy manner. So let us go to one reason for why I love child development. This is a video, and they'll tell you, but a bunch of children are answering a question about their dream job. And you can tell there's kind of a range of ages. I might stop throughout. That's how I like to use videos, but it's just a delightful little video that I hope you enjoy as much as I did. So I just wanted to stop. This is a perfect example of the differences in development between ages. You can tell this is a younger child. I would have to say 3 or 4, maybe 5. Oh, and her thing, you know, she chooses most likely either what her parent might do or something that she sees regularly. Now we have a student who's probably, I mean, even beyond what is early childhood, we'll talk about next, but probably 9 or 10. I mean, also you see an older child providing this complex reason behind why he wants to be this thing. Whereas you had this younger child who just was having ideas pop into his head, a pilot, dad, pilot racer dad. Again, very much appropriate for the developmental age of that child. I just realized I don't know if I'm even sharing my sound. Hold on. I am so sorry. This is just one of my worst share sound. Yep. I apologize for that. I should have realized that sooner. I will turn my camera back on too. I just went to get a soda or seltzer.
Cake. I want to be a pop star. Rock star. Singer. Singer.
I want to be a cook, but I don't really know how to actually cook.
I want to be an artist. Painter. I want to be an artist that goes around painting walls. An artist and a video game maker.
Video game designer.
Video gamer. I want to be a filmmaker. Whatever my dad is.
Oh, do you know what your dad is?
I'm not sure. I'll be a doctor. Doctor. A mermaid. A mermaid doctor. Heart surgeon. Neurosurgeon.
Cardiologist.
Gynecologist. Pediatrician, the kid's doctor. Pediatrician.
And why do you want to do that?
I want to be a doctor and then I can wear rainbow sweatpants.
I really want to be a nurse. Everyone says you have to be very good at science and math. I'm not really, but I still want to be one.
I want to be a pet doctor because I like helping animals. Pet vet. Veterinarian.
Zoologist.
Princess Fairy zookeeper.
How much do you think they get paid?
$29.
I love videos like that because children are just very honest and authentic, and it also really shows their responses, how different ages represent different stages in development with our language and cognitive development. You know, what is your understanding of what is a job? What do people mean when they say, what do you want to be? Sometimes it's very aspirational. I want to be an actor. I want to be a singer. I know that was me for a very long time. I wanted to be a singer. And then we have children who eventually, I want to be in the US Army because my mom or my grandmother always wanted to and she never did enlist. Very interesting range of answers, and that's kind of the beauty of development is when you see these kids at different ages, you can see where development has you can see the different stages of development that they're all at. I think that's pretty cool. Yeah, so let's go.
What do you want to be when you grow up?
I want to be... Hey, I never think of that.
There. Sorry, that didn't work as well as I wanted to. So, what is development? I'm going to take the definition that is right from the book. I don't want to make this any more difficult. It is a process by which humans can change both quantitatively, so ways that we can easily measure with numbers. So, I grew, one of my best signs of development was when I went through puberty. Sorry, not to go too TMI, but when I was 11, the summer before I turned 12, I ended school around 5'2". And then when I started 7th grade, so this was between 6th and 7th grade, right before I turned 12, I was 5'7". I had grown 5 inches in a summer. That is something you can quantitatively notice. Like you can say she grew 5 inches in a summer. Changes that are more qualitative are probably more attitudes, right? We talk about with adolescence, this change in moods, these hormonal changes. When we're talking about young children, we might be talking about something related to ego. Something very common that occurs in the preschool years is the development of ego and perspective taking more than anything, and the ability to take on perspective rather than living within just your ego. We'll go into that. There's a great experiment that's been done. I'll show you some videos about that at a later date. But that's one of the ways that humans can more qualitatively grow, although even still you can measure that, but it's a more qualitative construct or component. I'm trying to think of another way. More of them are related to personality and identity changes too. So as you grow up, you also take on certain identities. For me, I'd say one of my identities for a long time was as a singer, as someone who could spell really well. you know, and as I grew up, that became more, now I'm a teacher. That's really my identity more than anything. Specific to this course and what we'll be talking about is early child development, and early child development encompasses birth through age 8 years old. And when we talk about development, when we assess development, we typically look at these 5 areas. Social emotional typically refers to both behavior. It also refers to kind of temperament and self-regulation. How well can children cope? And a lot of that is about how well they were taught or allowed to cope when they were younger. Fine and gross motor. If you haven't heard those terms, I'll very quickly say fine motor typically are things related to your hands or small motor skills. So a fine motor skill is writing with my pencil or pen. Gross motor are those large motor movements. So my ability to walk, that's a gross motor skill. My ability to climb upstairs, that's a gross motor skill. That's part of development. Cognitive, that's more about not just brain development, but your cognitive skills, which are about the ability to follow instructions, the ability to hold different pieces of information, your memory, executive functioning, which we'll talk about. Individuals, there are a lot of individuals these days, especially with the increase of autism and just the increase in knowledge of, I don't want to say high functioning autism, but that there are a lot of people with autism who don't have a diagnosis, who have these executive functioning issues, difficulty with organization, difficulty with impulsivity, difficulty staying focused and paying attention and holding different thoughts in their brain. I am one of those people, but I've also learned how to cope with it over the course of my life. And if you are too, we can always talk about that. That's the beauty of having been a special education teacher in practice, that I understand some of these issues, not only as a teacher, but as someone who has them myself. Language development, something that I see a lot in my, that I have seen a lot in my practice. A lot of students that have special needs specifically typically have language delays, and more often than not expressive, which is their ability to speak or create some sort of communication. Receptive language, the opposite of that is the ability to understand what is spoken to you or what is communicated to you. Because there are people who might never speak, but that doesn't mean they don't have an expressive or receptive language, right? A person could fluently speak in sign language. I don't know what I was doing. I mean, this is not sign language. And that they can't actually use verbal speech, but they're extremely expressive. And then I add adaptive. This is specific to behavior more than anything in life skills. And these come into play later on in life and also very early. So one of those skills would be toileting. I know one of the things I've worked on with a lot of my students with special needs are toileting skills. Toilet training is very important and critical to independence for young children. That's why it's so stressful for parents, but so necessary, because you go from changing diapers and worrying about having when you need to change a diaper and where to, oh, I don't even have to do this. My kids can go to the bathroom. So it's very important, but that process, it's difficult. And often it's a skill that we work on for kids with special needs. Okay. Now that's kind of a brief look. We'll dive more into these during another class. I just wanted to get an idea of what we look at when we're talking about development. And now we're going to look at the development through history. I'm going to look at my notes a little bit for this, because although I know early childhood well, and I know about encouraging diversity and cultural competence, I don't know it as well in terms of the impact on society. So let's dive in. I really did want to do animations. I hate when I do this. So something that the book talked about and I would like to bring up is how political, I don't want to say political events, but a lot of political events in the US especially, but also worldwide, caused oppression for certain cultural groups. One of the major political events in our time was, and I want to make sure I'm not, was slavery and colonialism. And so one of the examples brought is how, one is that it created this unification within cultures. This is probably, even though the example in the book talked about Puerto Rican families, and I believe living in Puerto Rico, this is also true for families of, I don't want to say specifically just like Hispanic, Latino, Latinx descent. This is true a lot for a lot of families who have immigrated to the US, but still remain kind of a minority in terms of how they're viewed by this kind of US perspective. So people see the Latino and Hispanic community as a minority. People view African American families as minorities or Black families as minorities. Those of us of European descent, of course, myself included, you know, I'm very Irish and English and whatever. We are not those who really faced oppression. And especially now, we're not a minority. I can honestly say I don't feel like this collective nature with a bunch of people who I know are of Irish descent. I really don't. But this is definitely true of these different minorities who have experienced oppression. I don't want to go through all of these, but I do think understanding what they mean is important, even if these phrases, I'm going to try and pronounce them correctly. It's been a while since I took Spanish. Compadrasco? No, I don't think that's a roll dog. Compadrasco, I can't even roll. Hijos de crianza en como de la familia. Those of you who can speak Spanish should tell me that I've said those wrong, and that's okay. But those are common terms that came up within this time where Puerto Rican families were feeling oppressed by their social and political circumstances. And so like, and these all speak to the idea that we're not just looking at family as those who are blood relatives. We're looking at, or immediate family members, right? We're looking at family as extended family and friends and neighbors. And, you know, this is probably a great example of this still evident today, or at least was 10 years ago. Our families living in Providence on kind of that Broad Street area. That part of Providence, at least at that time, was extremely, was much more Hispanic and Latino, though Providence is predominantly more so Hispanic and Latino than any other cultures, that particular street was. And so I started to learn that these neighborhoods were very collective. These people seemed to know each other very well. I had students from my classroom who were part of these families, and they did have these very informal family members, I guess. So that's kind of one, and in some ways, like, this is a very positive piece that came out of oppression. However, is that okay? No, not at all, because these people only united because they were experiencing this terrible thing together, and that was how they survived. I think what we as people who didn't, and I say we, meaning people like me, because clearly I am white and I didn't suffer any type of oppression. It's important that we understand how these kind of beliefs, how these different cultural tendencies came about. And how do they influence development? Well, think about if you are growing up in a family where you have like 6 different parents. That's not a good or bad thing. It means you have a lot of support around you. It also means you have a lot of different authority figures. One of, I think, the most interesting and important examples that the book brought up was about enslaved African Americans. And I thought this was a very powerful example. It refers to this firm and directive socialization practices, in that for many parents who were enslaved and had children, they started to use extremely harsh discipline tactics like the switch, using something to as a much harsher discipline tactic. And it was for no other reason but survival, because parents would see the consequences of their children acting up. I don't know how else to say it. What I think is really the best way to say it is behaving in a way unexpected to slave owners and those in power. When that did happen, these children were not just harshly punished. I mean, they almost died, it sounds like, or their lives were often in danger if they did behave in a way abnormal to the norm at that time. So to prevent that, the kind of best way that these families knew how to cope was, we have to use an extremely harsh discipline tactic that they will survive, but they will learn. And that's where kind of using a switch or some sort of thing to, I don't want to say whip, but that's kind of what it was, their children was used. And when you think about it in those terms, yeah, it sounds harsh and it sounds like abuse. But when you're looking at your options of surviving and not surviving, you don't have a choice. And as a parent, what do you ultimately need to do? You're there to keep your children safe. And at that time, I mean, safe, alive, healthy, but safe was really the ultimate goal because they weren't always safe. So I think that's a really great example, and how even though we don't have slavery, these same types of discipline practices tended to be passed down because that's how these generations learned to discipline, and it was effective. How would you, if it's not broke, why fix it? We know now that these are not really the most effective practices, but we need to be very sensitive to their background and where they came from. And something that's also very important is that the dominant views, slavery and colonialization highly influence the dominant cultural views on education. And when I say dominant, I don't even mean the predominant people, although if it was white, then that's what I mean. It's more the most powerful cultural views. And Western education. And what's interesting is like that, how do I say this? White individuals at this time who had the power dictated education, and the way that oppressed groups reacted to it was also very unique. So in the book, it highlights how some African Americans, some Black families, in response to this oppression they felt during slavery and colonialization, decided we're going to value Western education and do better than these white kids. Whereas some families did not feel that same appreciation. One of the examples were Native American families, and instead rejected those practices that were brought on by Western education, and often educated children in their own communities. Oh, sorry. That is the difficult part, because this is not an area I know as well. I do have a deep understanding of how cultural differences can influence development. It's the history part that is definitely a little bit more difficult for me, because it's not part, I've talked a lot about different histories of education, but not specific to kind of childhood in a while. All right, let's go to the next slide. And this will be our last slide of like a lot of text. So this is looking at, again, Western perspectives, and Western perspectives. When we're talking about Western, we're talking really the Western Hemisphere. That's really what it is. So into the Middle Ages, and I find this fascinating, infants and like that entire group of birth to 7 years old, they were all called infants, and they were not taken care of. They were really, for the most part, just a problem for families. And infanticide, I hate to say it, but the mass murdering of infants was common, and it was more because of survival of the adults, which just, I don't want to get into it. It's just the way that the time was. Once someone was 7, I mean, I can't even imagine that because one of my stepkids is 6 and almost 7. But once a child is 7, they were considered an adult at that time. Remember, life expectancy was much different back then. I believe it was probably, 20, 30 years old was as long as someone lived. So it makes sense that an adult was 7. Just when we think about a 7-year-old, they are not mature. They're not someone who I would want to be responsible for, a leadership role within my society, just because they haven't had the opportunity to develop and live like a child. After the Middle Ages, we move to the Renaissance, or the Renaissance. I'm not going to be that way. This is when we started to see a difference between childhood and adulthood. I have a misspelling, but at this time, there was a lot of influence from the church, and children were looked at as born evil. And that we, or, educators, adults, it was their job to educate them in the practices of the church to become good people. And there was this term, breaking the will of the child, and that was specific to kind of beating the devil out of them. Again, also kind of a harsh tactic. It emerged from what was happening in the time, right? At that time, there was a heavy influence of the church, the Renaissance, a rebirth of kind of our understanding of humans and development as well. But again, that was not the steadfast hold because it was not accurate. In the 19th and 20th centuries, which I always find this confusing, 1800s and the 1900s, this is when we had more of our kind of more well-known psychologists starting to develop theories on development. We started to see a focus on socialization. Wonderful was a decrease in infant mortality, but that was also because of our increase in access to good medical practice and just what we knew about the development of infants and how to care for them properly. And then there was also this increasing influence across developmental domains. So we went, not only did we start looking at childhood as separate from adulthood and the importance of socialization, and there's a lot that I have read about the influx of schools and the different schools that have been introduced over the last century, the 20th century. And that was a lot about socialization and using socialization as kind of a control in schools. But that doesn't negate the fact that socialization is important in development. We know that we cannot grow up in an isolated world or we will be weird. We need to grow up in a world where we are around people so that we can understand how to interact with people. All right. So that is what I have right now on those areas. I would like to do a quick wrap up. When I do wrap ups, oh, now you can see what I was watching. When I do wrap ups, I like to do them with you. So here I will do what we talked about with you. We talked about the syllabus. There are changes to be made and reflected after this lecture is posted. Also review key points to remember. We learned about child development, 5 domains, and early childhood is birth through 8. And we learned about historical perspectives and the influence of slavery and colonization development. Yes. I like to do this because it then gives you a reminder, okay, so this is what we did. This is maybe what I should review. But that is what we've done today. And then I'll go back to this. And then, ooh, I wasn't ready. So next week, I just wanted to preview. We're going to be talking, like I said, about the trauma-informed informed perspective on child development. It's very important. The book also highlights how trauma has become pervasive through the lives of all children. I definitely think that's true. I think it's true of even, you know, my generation and current generations who are adults now, that we experience trauma that we didn't understand to be trauma until we were adults. And I think if we can if we can notice and address these situations sooner, then we're doing better as educators or as supporters of early childhood development. We have gone over a lot of key terms so far, and I want to make sure we know those. So I'm going to have a key terms activity. And then the next section is on research and child development. I am not going to focus too much on that beyond what you need to focus on when you're reading research on child development. It can be very difficult. There's certain text or articles I would tell you to focus on and others to ignore, and we'll talk about that. All right. There is no exit ticket today because we already did one for this week, and I'm only doing once a week. If you have any information that you would like to share with me or concerns, please, please, please do not hesitate to reach out. And I apologize for the video earlier. I know the sound didn't work at first. Hopefully you still enjoyed it, or maybe you just watched my expressions. I'm not sure. But that said, thank you, and I hope you all have a great day.